This is a Pulp Archive recording. All public Pulp Archive recordings are licensed under Creative Commons. For more information or to support us, please visit patreon.com/pulparchive. This episode was prepared by Soul and narrated by Edward, the digital narrator. The Sleepers by August W. Derleth. Weird Tales, December 1927. This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised.
"That story," began the man with the gold spectacles, crossing his legs, "reminds me of an odd incident that befell me just last year." The other three men moved closer around the fireplace and looked over at him expectantly. The man with the gold spectacles repeated his statement unnoticed by them. A thin little man, clad in a blue suit with brass buttons, slid onto the fifth seat, somewhat back in the shadows. The inquisitive flames in the fireplace leaped higher to light up the face of the newcomer. But the effort was too much for them, and they sank back, exhausted. The four men did not see him. It was last summer. I was at the time in Hollywood working with the director of my latest book, which was being filmed, when my publisher in Chicago wired me to come to him at once. The matter was urgent, he stated somewhat testily. I wired back that I would come immediately. The train I took was the Midnight Express. When I called for my ticket, every Pullman was filled to capacity. Certainly, thought I am not going to be cheated out of a night's rest merely because the Pullman cars are all filled to capacity. So I clamored loudly for a Pullman. I was not alone in my demand, for a pompous salesman who had purchased his ticket after I had procured mine added his voice to mine. At length, another Pullman was added. Had it not been for the hullabaloo the salesman and I raised, the incident I am about to relate would never have happened. It being shortly after midnight, I wanted to retire. I left the salesman smoking out on the rear platform of our car, and I went into the extra Pullman. My berth was lower 7, and I went directly over to that number and pulled the curtains aside. But I shut them again as quickly as I had opened them, for a man lay in my berth, sleeping peacefully. I was indignant that the officials should cause such an error. I called for the porter, who came in as fast as his sleeping feet would carry him. Said I, when the man had come abreast of me, "Sam, there is a man in my berth." He grinned foolishly and pulled the curtains slightly aside. "Indeed, sir, indeed there is." "Very unfortunate, sir, and that's a fact." "Sam," I answered, "go and get me the Pullman conductor, and don't you dare to come back without him." "Indeed I will, sir." After what seemed a wholly unnecessary interval, Sam returned with the Pullman conductor. When the conductor stepped into the car, he asked, "Are you McKirke?" "Yes," said I. "I am McKay." "H.P. Pahoke?" "Yes," said I again. "H.P. Pa." He came up to me. "Sam tells me that you claim that your berth is occupied. Lower 7 was assigned to H.P. Makauka and to no one else. As a matter of fact, there are only 2 people in this extra car, you and a salesman, C.E. Schweers." "Is that right?" said I. It annoyed me that the conductor took so much for granted. He had never even peeped into the berth, and already he was turning to go. "Just a minute. Mr. Schweers is out on the platform. Mr. McCarthy is right here, yours truly, and I say that there is a man in lower 7. And I pulled aside the curtain, and the conductor looked in and saw the man there. It wounded his pride to find that he was wrong, and so he called loudly to the sleeping man. But the man didn't move, so he went over to him and reached his hand in to shake the sleeper. Now I couldn't see what happened, but I was staring right into the conductor's face, and I saw his expression change so rapidly that I thought he was going to faint. His face went white altogether. He pulled his hand out quickly, as if he had been touching a hot iron, and then he pushed the curtains wide apart to admit as much light as possible. Then he looked in again. All the time I could see the man lying there in the light admitted by the widely opened curtains. I said nothing. He turned to me and pointed at the sleeper. "Mahaki, reach in there and touch him." I thought it was an odd request, but I did it, and I'll wager any amount that my face went as white as his did. For I swear that I saw that man there with the coverlet turned back at his shoulders. I saw that, but my hand felt the undisturbed smoothness of the coverlet. And as I looked, my hand went straight through the man. San left by one door as Mr. Schweers came in by the other. The conductor and I stood in the aisle staring stupidly at the sleeper in my berth. A smothered exclamation from Schweers caused us to turn to him. He stood before berth 3, the lower, staring at something. We knew what he would say before he said it. "There is a man in my berth." The conductor stared at him. I stared at him. He turned to the conductor. "Well, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm not paying for a filled berth." "Feel him," the conductor stammered. "Yes," said I. "Feel him." He looked oddly at us, but obediently he reached in to feel him. And shortly there were 3 white-faced people in the aisle of the extra Pullman, all staring stupidly at a man sleeping in the berth of a Pullman car. "By God," said the conductor with effort, "there is some mystery in this," the fact which had not escaped the notice of any of us. He moved resolutely to berth 6 and pulled aside the curtains, and there lay a woman sleeping, and again what we saw we could not feel. And the 3 of us made the rounds, and every berth, upper and lower, was occupied by a man, woman, or child. And we came back to berth 7 and stood there staring at the sleeper. And while we stood there, the door opened at the end of the car, and a thin little man who wore a conductor's blue suit with brass buttons walked in and looked nervously around. He had the attitude as of being summoned and looking for whoever had summoned him. Not so, Mr. Macarie. The conductor had a premonition that all was not well, and he came into the Pullman to justify or destroy that premonition. It was the little man, the newcomer, who had spoken, but no one seemed to have heard him. "But we didn't stare very much longer," continued the man with the gold spectacles. For suddenly, the thin little conductor that had entered vanished in the side of the Pullman car. And when we turned back to look at the sleepers, we saw only the unrumpled spreads on our beds. Immediately the conductor rushed out onto the rear platform. Mr. Schweers and I followed him. We were going round the famous horseshoe curve. The country was all radiant in the bright moonlight. The conductor turned to us. "Do either of you know what happened here at this spot 1 year ago today?" "No," said Schweers. "I can't think of anything." I, too, was forced to shake my head. "What?" returned the conductor. "Have both of you forgotten the famous Midnight Express wreck of last August 7th? Of course, we hadn't. It happened on that spot just a little way back there in the moonlight, on a night just like this. 77 people died in that wreck. This car is one that was salvaged from the wreckage and was rebuilt. This is its first trip in its rebuilt form. But the people in the berths," interrupted Schweers. "Yes, those people in the berths. You noticed they all disappeared on the spot of the accident, didn't they? Well, figure it out for yourselves, gentlemen." And with that, he went back to his post. "And that's what I say to you, gentlemen, figure it all out for yourselves. Were those sleepers, or weren't they? For my part, I am convinced." There was a meditative silence. Then the man with the gold spectacles spoke again. "By the way, didn't one of you premonition the phantom conductor had? I thought someone said something about it, but as I recollect the accident, the conductor was killed at once, so you couldn't possibly know how he felt before the accident. Didn't anyone say something? And all of the men turned to the fifth chair upon which the thin little man in the faded blue conductor's suit with brass buttons had been sitting. There was no answer, and the firelight flickered on the bolt of the locked door. The Cats of Ulthar by H.P. Lovecraft. Weird Tales. February 1926. This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised. It is said that in Ulthar, which lies beyond the river Skye, no man may kill a cat. And this I can verily believe, as I gaze upon him who sitteth purring before the fire. For the cat is cryptic and close to strange things which men cannot see. He is the soul of antique wood Egyptus and bearer of tales from forgotten cities in Moroccan and Ophir. He is the kin of the jungle's lords and heir to the secrets of hoary and sinister Africa. The Sphinx is his cousin, and he speaks her language, but he is more ancient than the Sphinx and remembers that which she hath forgotten. In Ulthar, before ever the burden forbade the killing of cats, there dwelt an old cotter and his wife, who delighted to trap and slay the cats of their neighbours. Why they did this, I know not, save that many hate the voice of the cat in the night, and take it ill that cats should run stealthily about yards and gardens at twilight. But whatever the reason, this old man and woman took pleasure in trapping and slaying every cat which came near to their hovel. And from some of the sounds heard after dark, many villagers fancied that the manner of slaying was exceedingly peculiar. But the villagers did not discuss such things with the old man and his wife, because of the habitual expression on the withered faces of the two, and because their cottage was so small and so darkly hidden under spreading oaks at the back of a neglected yard. In truth, much as the owners of cats hated these odd folk, they feared them more, and instead of berating them as brutal assassins, merely took care that no cherished pet or mouser should stray toward the remote hovel under the dark trees. When, through some unavoidable oversight, a cat was missed, and sounds heard after dark, the loser would lament impotently, or console himself by thanking fate that it was not one of his children who had thus vanished. For the people of Ulthar were simple, and knew not whence it is that all cats first came. One day a caravan of strange wanderers from the south entered the narrow, cobbled streets of Ulthar. Dark wanderers they were, and unlike the other roving folk who passed through the village twice every year. In the marketplace they told fortunes for silver, and bought gay beads from the merchants. What was the land of these wanderers, none could tell, but it was seen that they were given to strange prayers, and that they had painted on the sides of their wagons strange figures with human bodies, and the heads of cats, hawks, rams, and lions. And the leader of the caravan wore a headdress with 2 horns and a curious disc betwixt the horns. There was in this singular caravan a little boy, with no father or mother, but only a tiny black kitten to cherish. The plague had not been kind to him, yet had left him this small, furry thing to mitigate his sorrow. And when one is very young, one can find great relief in the lively antics of a black kitten. So the boy, whom the dark people called Nenes, smiled more often than he wept, as he sat playing with his graceful kitten on the steps of an oddly painted wagon. On the 3rd morning of the wanderer's stay in Ulthar, Menes could not find his kitten, and as he sobbed aloud in the marketplace, certain villagers told him of the old man and his wife, and of sounds heard in the night. And when he heard these things, his sobbing gave place to meditation, and finally to prayer. He stretched out his arms toward the sun, and prayed in a tongue no villager could understand. Though indeed, the villagers did not try very hard to understand, since their attention was mostly taken up by the sky and the odd shapes the clouds were assuming. It was very peculiar, but as the little boy uttered his petition, there seemed to form overhead the shadowy, nebulous figures of exotic things, of hybrid creatures crowned with horn-flanked discs. Nature is full of such illusions to impress the imaginative. That night the wanderers left Ulthar and were never seen again. And the householders were troubled when they noticed that in the village there was not a cat to be found. From each hearth, the familiar cat had vanished. Cats, large and small, black, grey, striped, yellow and white. Old Cranon, the burgomaster, swore that the dark folk had taken the cats away in revenge for the killing of Menny's kitten, and cursed the caravan and the little boy. But Nith the lean notary declared that the old cotter and his wife were more likely persons to suspect, for their hatred of cats was notorious and increasingly bold. Still, no one durst complain to the sinister couple, even when little Atul, the innkeeper's son, vowed that he had at twilight seen all the cats of Ulthar in that accursed yard under the trees, pacing very slowly and solemnly in a circle around the cottage, two abreast, as if in performance of some unheard-of rite of beasts. The villagers did not know how much to believe from so small a boy, and though they feared that the evil pair had charmed the cats to their death, they preferred not to chide the old cotter till they met him outside his dark and repellent yard. So Ulthar went to sleep in vain anger, and when the people awoke at dawn, behold, every cat was back at his accustomed hearth. Large and small, black, grey, striped, yellow and white, none was missing. Very sleek and fat did the cats appear, and sonorous with purring content. The citizens talked with one another of the affair and marvelled not a little. Old Cranon again insisted that it was the dark folk who had taken them, since cats did not return alive from the cottage of the ancient man and his wife. But all agreed on one thing, that the refusal of all the cats to eat their portions of meat or drink their sources of milk was exceedingly curious. And for 2 whole days, the sleek, lazy cats of Ulthar would touch no food, but only doze by the fire or in the sun. It was fully a week before the villagers noticed that no lights were appearing at dusk in the windows of the cottage under the trees. Then the lean Nith remarked that no one had seen the old man or his wife since the night the cats were away. In another week, the burgomaster decided to overcome his fears and call at the strangely silent dwelling as a matter of duty, though in doing so he was careful to take with him Shang, the blacksmith, and Fool, the cutter of stone, as witnesses. And when they had broken down the frail door, they found only this: 2 cleanly picked human skeletons on the earthen floor, and a number of singular beetles crawling in the shadowy corners. There was subsequently much talk amongst the burgesses of Ulthar. Zath, the coroner, disputed at length with Nith, the lean notary, and Cranon and Shang and Thul were overwhelmed with questions. Even little Atau, the innkeeper's son, was closely questioned and given a sweetmeat as reward. They talked of the old cotter and his wife, of the caravan of dark wanderers, of small Menes and his black kitten, of the prayer of Menes, and of the sky during that prayer, of the doings of the cats on the night the caravan left, and of what was later found in the cottage under the dark trees in the repellent yard. And, in the end, the burgesses passed that remarkable law which is told of by traders in Hafeg and discussed by travellers in Nyr, namely, that in Ulthar no man may kill a cat. Eyes by Galen C. Collin. Weird Tales, May 1924.
This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised.
Happy Bill Ransom of struggling medical college days is now Dr. William Ransom, world-renowned surgeon, and collects thousands in fat fees every year. But to this day, the stare of a pair of unblinking, intense blue eyes will make him shudder. No matter what the possible fee, he will always refuse a case of optical surgery. His colleagues call it eccentricity, but I know different. For you see, there is a story, and I got it firsthand. It happened near the close of our last year in school. I didn't usually study on Sunday evenings. A medical student who spends his days cutting up cadavers and listening to lectures on symptoms and ailments needs at least one day's relaxation each week. But final examinations began Monday morning, and I was not sure of myself in optical anatomy. That is the reason Happy Bill Ransom found me in my room. The drizzly and drear June night. There came a clatter at my elbow. 2 tiny red lights flashed on. I turned to my door and called, "Come!" The door opened, and there stood Bill. Big, handsome, blonde, poor as a church mouse, but carefree and happy. That was Bill. His hat was gone. His hair was unkempt and uncombed. The usually radiant face was haggard and drawn. Dark circles were beneath his eyes. He staggered like a drunken man. "For God's sake, Jim! The eyes! Turn off that damned thing!" His voice was hoarse and broken as he begged. He was looking at my door knocker, a contrivance of which I was inordinately proud. It was a perfect snow-white skull with the lower jaw hinged. Tiny electric bulbs of red glass were in the eye sockets. A touch of the button outside my door turned on the red lights and set a toy motor running. The motor, in turn, started the lower jaw clattering. "What's the matter, Bill?" I gasped as I threw off the switch. He sank into my big Morris chair and covered his face with his hands. His body shook with a violent chill. "Some jag," I mumbled, half to myself. "I'm not drunk," he said hoarsely. Jim, I believe I'm going insane. I've got to tell someone. You are the best friend I have in the world. Will you listen to me? Will you help me fight it off? You've got to, Jim." "Calm down, old son," I said evenly, although I was beginning to get just a little shaky at Bill's palpable terror. "Sure, I'll help you. You know that. What is it?" "We've only 3 weeks more at the old school," he began. "Then we'll be full-fledged. MDs and Jim, I've wanted a skeleton to mount for my study. I have never before wanted anything quite so badly. It has become an obsession with me. I can't buy one. It is all I can do to earn my expenses. I have tried to trade for one. I have even been tempted to steal Jim. I had begun to get desperate. The days were passing and I was still as far as ever from getting my skeleton. It maddened me that the cemeteries guarded thousands of skeletons and I could not even have the smallest and most insignificant of the lot. Last Friday I succumbed to temptation. I determined to desecrate the home of the dead. You don't blame me, do you? You know what it is to want something so badly that any sacrifice is not too great? Do you remember last Friday night? It was foggy and a chill was in the air. A light mist was falling, just enough to make each branch and twig along the cemetery drive moisture-laden and dripping. You couldn't see 10 feet ahead of your face. I went alone. Under my arm was a grain bag in which to carry back the bones. A spade was my only tool, and I'd filed it from the caretaker's shed. An electric flash gave all the illumination I needed. I was not afraid of the dead then. A medical student seldom is. Yet, as a heritage from our ancestors, a graveyard always holds something of shuddering dread. And this was a gloomy night. As I slunk along the drive, the wet branches slapped me in the face. I knew what they were, but I could not repress a shudder at each cold touch. I could almost see the spirits of the dead. I could almost hear their protests at this vandalism. I searched among the headstones, reading the inscriptions. I wanted a body that had been buried long enough for the flesh to drop from the bones. The skeleton must be that of a man of intelligence, for I wanted the skull to be beautifully molded. That is why I chose the grave marked. The name sounded solid and dependable, and he had been buried in 1902. The name doesn't conjure up the image of a haunting spectre, does it? But, God, why did I choose that grave? I began digging. Deeper and deeper I went. Every spadeful of earth taken from the grave added to my dread, but I was desperate. Finally, my spade struck something solid, something it would not penetrate. A few more spadefuls and I uncovered the box that held the coffin. I threw out the last of the earth, and with it went my terror. The wood was so badly decayed that it would hardly support my weight. It came away easily as I pried with the broad spade. The coffin came into view, an old-fashioned casket solidly built but not securely fastened. By the radiance of my flashlight, I found the catch and threw back the lid. I was standing at the head as the cover came up. I had my first view of the skeleton. All the flesh had returned to dust, but the bones were snow-white and beautifully preserved. I first saw the feet, then the leg bones, then the arched ribs. I gloated. I laughed aloud, and the grave threw back the echoes. Then the laugh froze on my lips as I looked at the skull. I screamed with terror. Clammy sweat dripped from my brow. The spade fell crashing into the naked ribs. Jim, you'll never believe it. Two cold blue eyes stared up at me from the fleshless skull. They were glassy with hate, unwinkingly glaring back the light from my flash. They bored into my very soul. Again I screamed. Frantically I tried to climb from the pit. 3 times I clawed my way to the top only to fall back among the bones. Still the eyes stared at me. They seemed to leer at my fright. The 4th attempt and I reached the top. Flashlight, spade, sack, everything was forgotten. I fled for my very life from those eyes. They seemed to follow me. They menaced me from every side as I sped up the street and into my room. They darted venomous glances at me from every streetlight. I slammed the door, and still those hateful orbs were with me. I tried to read. Those eyes came between me and the page. I went to bed, but I could not sleep. After hours of tossing, I dozed fitfully. I dreamed the eyes were those of a demon. He tortured me with red-hot irons and glared sardonically at my helplessness. Again the eyes inhabited a corpse, and I was bound to it hand and foot. Gradually it decayed, and I could not break my bonds. At last, it was the skeleton I had dug from the grave. I struggled, bound by that terrible sense of powerlessness which paralyzes us in our dreams. Finally, I awoke. Those eyes, those horrible staring eyes, I could see them everywhere. Then came morning, yesterday morning. I was weary and worn, but I could not study. I went to a picture show for distraction. All I could see was the eyes of the players, blue and cold. I tried to forget them in a round of golf. The little white ball stared up at me in a glare of hate. Those eyes again. Last night I tried again to sleep. The same dream haunted me. Jim, I must sleep, but I cannot help me. Jim, talk to me, reason with me. Jim. Am I going insane? Will those eyes haunt me forever? Bill was truly in a pitiable state. It would take but little more to push him across the bridge into insanity. But before he had fairly gotten into his story, I knew what sedative to administer. "Have you read the papers within the last 2 days?" I asked him. "I can't read, Jim. I can't even think." What is news to me when those horrible eyes will not leave me in peace? "Listen to this," I began, as I picked up Saturday morning's Gazette. "Sometime during last night, vandals entered Memorial Lawns and opened the grave of Robert William Sheldon, who died in 1902. Sheldon was noted during his lifetime as the only blind attorney in Kansas. The motive of the marauders is not known, as they were apparently frightened away before they had completed their designs. The skeleton was shattered, but the skull containing the 2 wonderfully constructed glass eyes was strangely untouched. Does that help you any? I asked as I turned toward Bill. But he only gasped once and sank back into the big Morris chair. His expression of terror had given place to a look of astonishment and blessed relief.
Thank you so much for hanging out today. My name is Sol, and this is the Pulp Archive. Now, if you had fun, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, and share. That stuff really helps. And like most stories we cover here, today's was recommended by you. So, if there's a story you'd like to see, send us an email at pulparchivelibrary@gmail.com. We'd love to cover it. If you'd like to support the podcast and keep us going, consider subscribing to our Apple channel or becoming a member on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/pulparchive. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get access to all our podcasts and private explicit episodes that wouldn't be allowed publicly. We feature almost every genre of pulp fiction, horror, detective, western, and even sports. Special thanks to our patrons who make the podcast possible and make every episode of the Pulp Archive happen. Every episode is dedicated to our Patreon members. I truly could not do this without you.